Okay, so this is actually my favorite panel. I think this is going to be such a fun panel. And how many here work with their spouse? Besides the 5 women who are going to be on the stage. Okay, I work with my spouse as well, so I have a lot to say about this topic. So I just wanted to briefly tell you 3 good things and 3 bad things about working with your spouse. So, bad thing number 1, your spouse thinks you're the one screwing up at work and not the other guy. But then there's a good thing. There's always something to talk about. And then there's also the bad thing. That means there's always something to fight about. And then the good thing is everything is a tax deduction. It really is. The bad thing, your sex life tracks your sales. And the really good thing, though, is that your co-founder is always on your team. So with that, Adriana Gascione, she's coming up. She's my co-host and the founder of Girls in Tech.
Thanks so much, Bambi. It's a pleasure to be here today. I wanted to thank Thomson Reuters as well as Vator for partnering with us, especially for this type of panel and create awareness about female entrepreneurship. If you don't know much about Girls in Tech, we are an organization that actually started in 2007 in San Francisco because I was one of about 40 employees and the only female, and I would look around the room every day because we had pods like a lot of startups do. I said, what's wrong with this picture? We need more sort of female, sort of the woman vibe, different perspectives to building product in the room. So that was sort of the inspiration to starting the organization, and now we're in over 30 cities around the globe and over 10,000 members. So we're really excited to be expanding the organization. And I also wanted to thank Eileen, but I think she left. But she actually was one of our speakers, our keynotes at one of our first events that Girls in Tech ever produced called the Catalyst Conference. And we had over 500 women come to the event. And I was inspired by none other than Oprah to create this conference, Oprah's O's conference. I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but there's about 5,000 women in one room and talking about everything from tech and business and finances to interior design and fashion and things like that. So it was electric, and I felt that we were collaborating and bonding, not competing, and so that's sort of why we created that event. So I was really excited when Bambi asked me to participate and sort of lead this panel discussion, because I too am thinking about starting a consulting company with my fiance, and in discussing whether or not we should move forward with this, we started having conflicts. I'm like, oh, well, this is not off to a good start. He comes from a very, very traditional consulting background, PwC, EY, and very structured, very analytical. And just from the get-go, I'm like, no, that's not how you do things. We're scrappy, we're resourceful, we do it like a startup. And he said, no, we do it like this, spreadsheets. And I said, okay, well, let's figure this out later. So I'm really excited to hear the perspectives from all of these wonderful women that have been successful in their careers and have decided to move forward in co-founding a startup with their spouses. So I'd like to start by everyone going sort of down the line, providing their name and just an overview of sort of the background and a little about your company.
Hi, I'm Eileen Gordon, and I've started 4 companies from a very different universe, the food and wine, hospitality, and television universe up in the Napa Valley and in San Francisco with my husband, who's a chef, Michael Chiarello. And we've done venture-backed startups together. We've done things that were funded in different ways. And so all 4 businesses have taken outside capital and have been founded in various forms with us together based on his 25-year career as a chef. So it's been very interesting, and I'm looking forward to this panel.
Great.
I'm Kristin Goldstein. I'm the founding CEO of a company called BackOps. We provide the back office for about 100 small businesses, accounting, finance, and HR. And this is the third of 3 startups that I have founded with my husband, who's on his 12th startup. And this is the first time this is actually my idea. I come from the hedge fund world, and when one of the conditions of marriage was that I actually moved to California, and once I did so, I realized I was a startup widow and just started to go to work with him and realized this is really the only thing I'm qualified to do, and became an expert, and it's been quite an adventure.
So I'm Andrew Davidson, and I co-founded with my husband a company called Parents Click. Our flagship site was Mothers Click, was an online community for moms, and in 2008 we were acquired by Lifetime Networks, which then merged with A&E, so that's why I'm with A&E. And my husband and I are both still with the company, so we've been working together for a long time. And I promoted your husband's show.
Thank you for that.
Honey, I'm Heidi Zach. I'm the co-founder of Third Love. My husband and I co-founded the company about a year ago, and he was at Sequoia Capital and I was at Google prior. So it's been a crazy ride over the past year, raising money and launching the business. And the company, we've developed our patented technology where you can actually size yourself using your mobile phone and then buy product through our mobile app, and we actually design and source and manufacture all our own product.
And you had a baby.
And I had a baby about 7 weeks ago, so lots going on.
I'm Jennifer Wong. I co-founded All 12 Apps with my husband Casey. We founded it in 2009 during my pregnancy and inspired by my pregnancy. So we met, got married, moved in, had a child, and started a company within a span of a year and a half. So talk about a challenge for a startup, but it's been great.
Great. I'm just curious, are any of these wonderful ladies' husbands in the audience?
Of course not.
Okay,
We will
cool,
only feed the
awesome.
kids
I can
when
like
we
be
get home.
controversial. Great. Well, we know that there are a lot of successful startups co-founded by married couples: Sugar, ModCloth, Eventbrite, Cliff Bar, Kate Spade, Fiji Water, and of course your companies. But I want to talk about. I mean, we're going to cover the good, bad, and the ugly, but I want to start off with some of the issues because I know during a call that we had earlier. Really, it seems like the issues outweigh the positives, but I want to sort of get a balanced look at everything. And the first issue is relationship management. So when you're at home or at work, or if it's in the same place, you're talking about your company consistently. You know, how to optimize. You're thinking of new ideas, brainstorming. In the bathroom, in the kitchen, wherever. So how do you control that, and how do you keep that work-life balance without, annoying each other?
Mark and I have a pretty simple rule. When we're at home, we're not allowed to talk about the business. We're people, we're spouses, we're partners personally, and we don't talk about work. And we also have a rule that once we take professional money, within 12 months, one of us parts from the company, so that there's never any question of doing the right thing.
Interesting. Anybody else?
I also think it's really important to set these boundaries of, vacation time is sacred or whatever. We had, at one point, it's like, you absolutely cannot talk about this before 8 in the morning. Definitely never in the shower.
Yeah, it's like
No, you have to
no
do it.
typing if either one of you is naked.
So, yeah.
It's a rule.
The camera might
Preserve
be
the
on.
company or our sex life, it's very important. But it does take
No,
a
it's a
while
role.
to figure that out, and you have to figure it out together, and you have to stick to it.
Yeah, I think it is really important, and it's really, really hard when you're with each other all the time, all day long. I found it very hard to just kind of turn it off and talk about something else. You could try, and then we would always come back to something that had to do with the company and with work. So I think it's an extra effort to have to do something like that, but it's very important.
So Kristin, you're talking about rules, and I'm not a rule follower, and I'm sure it's really hard to go into a marriage or a situation where you're like, these are the rules, and you both have to follow them. But I mean, do you guys actually have to sit down and brainstorm and write down certain rules that each of you have to follow in order to keep the sanity in the marriage and work life?
I'm a very structured person. My to-do list is in a grid. It forces me to think of the data in a hierarchy. So there's a place for everything and everything in its place. And it forces you to be very concise, and you make better decisions, quicker decisions, because you're not just blah forever about everything.
Anybody else? Any rules that you guys have integrated into your lives?
I think it's easy to say things that you wouldn't necessarily say to a colleague, and you don't want to do that. You know,
Can you give an example? We want the juicy details.
Yeah, you might be overly direct or critical of an idea or something, and you have to really say to yourself, would I actually say that to another colleague if they weren't my spouse?
Exactly, like if
So-
you were, oh, I'm sorry.
Probably not. So you have to really keep
But
that in
that's
mind.
good.
Yeah.
It
Well,
is
yeah,
good.
sometimes
It's
I think
very
it is good, because if you're at work and your boss pisses you off and you want to say F you to your boss, you're probably not going to do it. You're going to go back, you're going to be upset about it, but you may say that to your spouse. And it can be good, it can be bad. I think you have to be able to take it, as we were talking about out in the hall. If you're afraid that if your husband, your wife starts yelling at you and you're going to take it personally, and you think that that affects somehow the way they love you and your relationship, then you should not go into business with them, because it's going to happen.
I think what you're talking about, though, is mutual respect and having domain expertise that you own.
Well,
and-
absolutely, absolutely. And I think you have to have that if you're going to go into a business, start a business with your spouse. And I think that kind of naturally happens. I think if you were both really, really strong in one area, you'd obviously have to bring in other people. But probably all of us can say that our husbands have certain expertise, and ours is very different. And you learn
And I
to
think
kind of stay in your area.
And I think your relationship has to be solid enough, and you have to be confident in your own ability so that you can respond, you know, I do suck at that, you're right, and move on. Because if you can't,
Right.
it'll never work.
Yeah, and to that point, domain expertise, I think that's very, very important, because you know, a lot of the conflicts that happen at startups are overlapping skill sets. You know, two developers can work together, but then when you start getting into business development and sales and design, then it starts creating a little bit of friction. And you know, you're very territorial. So, and I'm sure it gets exaggerated with marriage, right? Because you said it's very easy for you to be candid and open and say drop F-bombs to your hubby when something doesn't go right. But how do you guys do that? I mean, in your situations, do you focus on one skill set and the other person focus on the other, or how do you manage that?
Absolutely. I think that's what makes it work. And if I were investing or thinking about investing in a company where the founders were a husband and wife or partners, you know, you have to look for a really solid relationship first and foremost. And I think you want to look for a relationship that's pretty mature and where they understand each other's strengths and weaknesses, and that they're really complementary. I think that's, for us, absolutely what's worked.
Okay. Jennifer and Heidi?
Oh, no, for sure. I mean, for my husband and I, we're both from two different ends of the sort of spectrum. I'm more in product and marketing, and he's in technical. That's what works. At the end of the day, when you have a disagreement, you sort of vouch on whose expertise it is, and you sort of go with it. So if you overlap too much, I think you actually have more conflict.
Well, that's good. I think, you know, in terms of, you know, overlapping and really just focusing on all of the work, and we know that with startup, there's so much stress involved in creating a startup, a bootstrap startup. So how do you guys deal with stress? I mean, the stress of work can come into the relationship, and how do you compartmentalize those two areas? What are some of the tactics that you employ within your relationships to control that?
I think sometimes when, I don't know how many of you have kids out there, but sometimes your kids will get upset and they'll yell at you and say horrible things, and you know they don't really mean it. They're just upset or they're stressed, and definitely in this situation, you guys, the two partners are going to be stressed at the same time over the same things. And I think, you know, as a mom, I have two kids, and if my kids come to me and start yelling at me, I hate you, whatever, you just kind of calm them down and you deal with it. And in this type of relationship, I think one person really does have to just take the stress and handle it a lot differently and help deal with what the other person's going through. It doesn't always mean that it's me or the woman, but somebody has to kind of say, okay, wait a minute, I'm gonna just de-stress and deal with this issue.
I found that actually with the partnership, sometimes my partner and I flip-flop in terms of being the cheerleader or kind of the encourager. So you're going to have a roller coaster ride when you do a startup. There's always going to be up, there's always going to be huge downs. But sometimes you can flip-flop the role of who's going to be sort of motivating and pushing along, because you can't be the one person can't bear that burden the whole time. But if you kind of split that between the two, it really helps kind of keep the engine moving along.
And it goes back to ownership.
Yeah.
When you're splitting up the business in that way, usually you're having ups and downs at different times, hopefully with different areas of the business. So you can be there to support each other, figure out kind of how to move things along. Yeah.
I don't know if all of us have children. I think we all do, but I think nurturing a startup is not that different than nurturing a child. We take roles, good cop, bad cop. There are certain things we're good at, more so than our spouse, and it's kind of the same blueprint.
Great, thank you. And in terms of, I want to just sort of change topics a little bit, because this is actually really interesting to me, because I've heard from a lot of venture capitalists, like behind closed doors, there's talk about women founders, and there's talk about married couple founding teams. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. You know, third parties perceive there's some negative aspects to investing in working for husband and wife teams, or investing in husband and wife teams. And has this been difficult in attracting funding? Has this been difficult in any other aspect of building a business for you guys?
I can kind of speak to that because we raised money last year. I mean, I don't think we ever saw it was an issue, but I did see that there was definitely questions. A lot of times, one investor, to be named, I won't say the name, asked to talk to some of our employees. They were very serious about investing, and they actually brought a lot of our employees, we only had 4 at the time, into a room, we weren't there, and really talked to them about what my husband and I were like when we disagreed and how we handled that, and really press them on whether we were professional and all of that. So it was actually a bit stressful for them, but it all turned out well in the end. But for sure, I think people are very interested to hear it from your employees, not just from you, because you can just be putting on a great act in front of your investors.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that too, because we did a round about a year and a half ago. It is a problem and it isn't a problem. It is a problem for those that probably are not really a good match for you, but those that came on board to lead our round, it wasn't even an issue. It was like a 24-hour turnaround. And partly for our business, the comment we got back is we were a very authentic representation of the company we were building. So if we're doing things for parents and pregnant women, and we're a couple, who better to serve the demographic than us ourselves?
Yeah.
So
You're drinking your own Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
I've raised 2 rounds for the company with my husband, and it was a very interesting process because some very traditional VCs were very uncomfortable with the idea that I was the CEO. Some of these VCs are represented here, and especially during the Q&A session, there was a refusal to ask me questions. Body language back to me. It was a very eye-opening process for me in a number of ways. They couldn't help it.
Did your husband intervene and say, she
Yes.
has something to say?
He was great. He literally had to say at almost every meeting, she's the CEO. And
That's great.
actually at one meeting had to repeat it 4 times.
You're like, wear a sign.
I mean, you're looking at the deck.
Yeah.
And it was interesting, to say the least. We didn't take their money.
Good for you.
So I think what's been really helpful for us is in all of our restaurant businesses, hospitality and media. Michael was the lead character. I was the supporting character, vice president of marketing, digital strategist, or dot connector in general. And now I'm starting a venture called Barn Raiser, and I'll be the lead and he'll be a supporting character. So it's really, I think it's important that it's really clear who is in the lead. I think that's probably the most important thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that, with our acquisition and anybody who had come to us with funding. We definitely had clear roles, so probably important.
So sticking on the topic of finances, you know, if the two of you are co-founding a company, it means that you don't have the security of a big corporate job that's like paying you, you know, an income on a monthly basis. So is there anything that people that are interested in going into business with their spouse, is there anything that people should think about balancing finances or things that help you in this transition period?
I think it depends on how much of a risk you're taking financially, but make sure you're okay with risk. And make sure your family's going to be okay or has a backstop, or, you know, don't do it if it puts the entire family in jeopardy.
So like with Jennifer and myself, we were just starting our families, I think, right when we started our companies. And yeah, you have to make sure that you have some backup, some support.
A plan A, B, C, D, E, F. A lot of backup
All the way to
plans,
Z.
yeah.
But on the good side, I mean, it really, you know, banding together as a team, and you're so motivated to make sure it works. And it's going to work. It's your family, right?
I have to say, I do think some of the business models that I see from husband and wife teams are pretty solid because they have to be. There's all your eggs in one basket.
You know, I will add too, though, coming out the gates, we bootstrapped for 2 years and we're profitable. So when you talk about managing risk, we made sure that we had some sort of financial runway with the company getting before we launched. So it wasn't like we launched Raise Around and had no idea how to monetize. It was we came out with a sort of higher bar for ourselves.
Another thing that, you know, actually is very, very interesting to me, because in every workplace, startups mainly, I mean, you're all, not mainly, but in every workplace, you're also going to have conflict with your employees. And there's also some huge decisions that you're going to need to make. Acquisition, and do we do it or do we not? Raising money, employee hiring people, firing people. So if you and your spouse are in the head of the company and making these big decisions and you just don't agree, how do you resolve your conflicts? How do you bring in a third party, or what do you guys typically do?
Depends on the domain. You know, I think we've had a disagreement on a staff member, and it was an engineer. So at the end of the day, he got to make the call because he was CTO. And I think he ended up being right. But we kind of rely on whose expertise and domain it lies under, and we go with it.
A third party works well. So usually we bring in someone else trusted from the team to weigh in. That always helps. Yeah, for sure.
Who do you bring in?
It depends too. It depends what we're talking about. So again, it goes back to expertise in that area. Someone else we trust, or sometimes we'll call a board member or an advisor to the company and just throw the idea out at them and take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the level of the decision to be made, right? I mean, if it's a corporate governance issue, you need to involve your board.
Any other experiences?
You just have to know when to yield to each other and make sure it's not about winning against each other. You know, obviously, one of you has more of an expertise in the area, and you have to come to a conclusion. And then back the other
Parenting.
person. Yeah,
It's growing a startup.
Exactly.
So, I mean, we talk about the sort of issues that potentially could, you know, make it difficult to start a company with your spouse. But let's talk about the benefits, because I think that there are a lot. We don't often talk about them as much, but I mean, there's things like you're bonding, you're communicating more effectively, you're growing something together, and you're in it for the family. So what are some of the benefits that you think that have really stood out that actually have made your marriages stronger as a result?
Yeah, I think anything that puts you in that stressful situation and you work it out is going to make your relationships stronger, both within the marriage and within the company. And I also really believe that because you're going through the same thing at the same time, you always have somebody who understands, you know, what's happening, and if you really need to download or you really need some support, there's nobody that can understand what you're going through more than this person that you're collaborating with, and already cares for you anyway. So,
Yeah. Anybody else? No. So let's see, other benefits. I thought we were going to have more stories for that topic.
I'll tell you one.
Apparently there aren't any.
I think it's just probably one of the most incredible things to do together. So if you're passionate about what you're doing, you share a passion, you have complementary strengths, I think all of us would agree, it's pretty rocking, it's really great. You're going to work really hard anyway. So this allows you to spend a lot more time together doing very interesting things and growing together. So I think it's fantastic if all of the prior things we talked about are in check.
I think it gives you a newfound respect for your partner. I mean, we all, anyone who's married knows that their partner is successful at their job, but to really see them in action doing what they do best when you're working with them side by side brings your relationship to another level. And I think that's been really unexpected and really great. And then you also see the things that they're not as good at, and that goes back to giving constructive feedback and learning a lot from each other. And I think one of the things we have talked about is that you have a level of honesty with your co-founder when it's your husband or wife, and I think that that level of honesty also kind of moves along your relationships and makes it stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's really helped our communication between each other, just in our personal life and work life. Because you can get everything on the table and you know that everything is out there. You have an enormous amount of trust, and then it's much more efficient, and you can carry that same behavior in your personal life. And so we communicate much more efficiently and better with each other in our personal life than now that we've learned that from sort of our workspace.
Yeah, it was interesting that you said about the newfound respects, because that just reminds me that I don't think my husband ever would have found this out, and even stuff that I found out was that since I was kind of the face of the company, I was the mom, any kind of PR we did, I did some TV stuff and some radio stuff, and he is still to this day is blown away. He'll bring it up all the time. He's like, "You're so good at that," because he said he would just freak out if he had to do any of it. He's like, "You're just so easily. You just talk. You're on TV. I'd have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and be on the radio." And he's like, "I just have so much respect for the fact that you can do that and do it well." Never would have found that out if we hadn't done this.
I think multiple times a day you say to yourself, "Thank God he's doing that." Right?
Yeah.
And I don't have to.
And that doesn't
Yeah.
happen as
Stuff
often
I
at
didn't wanna
home.
do.
It just
Right.
doesn't.
Right.
Like, thank God he took out the garbage. Who cares?
So before we open it up to questions for the audience, I have a question for you. What questions should you be asking yourself before going into business with your spouse? Is it, can we work together? What's the risk involved? Is there that financial risk? What comes first, the relationship or the business? How do you balance that? I mean, what questions do you ask yourself, or did you ask yourself before starting the business?
Slightly different part of that topic. I think it's interesting that all of us seem to be at about the same age, at the same stage of life. I think when you are kind of in your peak decade, as is your spouse, easy peasy lemon squeezy. I think if one or both of you are on the ascend or on the decline, I think it's a little bit tougher because you're kind of you're a little bit more critical of the other person in either direction. And I think that's something you need to consider before starting a business. If you have a much younger spouse who you're gonna have to coach the whole time, it'll be exhausting. If you have someone much older who kind of doesn't realize that the cheese is being moved on him or her, that's also very difficult. So I think you have to be really aware of the phase of just where you are as a couple, as a person, as a professional, and take all that into consideration.
Yeah, and I think all of us have probably heard hundreds of times, how can you work with your husband? I mean, I hear it all the time. If I ever said that, I would kill him or he would kill me. And I think probably for all of us, you kind of know that you have the relationship, that kind of relationship where you're both strong enough where you can handle it, and it doesn't work for everybody.
Great. Well, we can open it up to questions from the audience. I saw a few hands go up during the discussion. Go ahead.
So, you talked a lot about you and your spouse and how that works for you, but I'm really wondering about everyone else. So, I mean, I grew up in a family where my parents worked together. They're both doctors, and you know, the dinner table was not going to complain. I can tell you that. You know, so I wonder if that the effect maybe on your children or on your employees to see that it's not a kind of sort of typical professional relationship. And how do you deal with that? Do they bring issues to you about that?
I think as far as your employees go, you have to be really, really uber professional, even more so than any other situation. You can't take anything from the house into the office. And you have to be even more transparent about all your decisions and your behavior and everything, so the employees feel comfortable that they're being treated like they would in any other place.
Yeah, it's tough sometimes. Because the way you interact with your spouse at home needs to be different than how you interact at work. And sometimes those lines get a little blurred, at least for me, sometimes they have. And you have to really step back and exactly what you said, hyper aware of how you're acting around your employees. And at home, around the kids, I do sometimes feel bad for my kids because we should implement those rules stronger at home. That, you know, my kids will just be sitting there and we're going on and on and on and on and on and on about something at work. So, yeah, you really have to be careful.
I'm willing to bet most of us on this panel err on the side of being overly professional at work.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
So I think it's amazing that you all decided to create a company with your husband. My husband and I are both CEOs of different companies. But my question is around childcare, being all of you seem to be mothers. I have twins who are 6 years old. And I find that I get less sleep than my husband because at home, I am still in charge. The burden of childcare and like running our household, I'm still chief medical officer, chief family officer, and I'm the CEO at home. So I'm just wondering, when you're doing a startup with your spouse and you're obviously have children in your lives, how do you juggle who's in charge of the children?
Believe it or not, the social mission of Back Ops is to prove one parent at a time that we don't have to choose between our children and our professional identities, which is very closely tied to our sense of self and worth. I get up and go home at 4 to enjoy what we call magic mommy time. I log back in at 8 o'clock. I'm fond of saying my biological kids have me from 4 to 8. My other children, the 100 employees, have me from 8 p.m. till midnight when the engineers hand off to the Ukrainian team. And I'm back online at 6 o'clock to handle the East Coast CPAs who start their day. You have to be so compartmentalized in that way, and every minute counts. You have to make the time. I am mom 100% off the grid from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock every day.
Yeah, and I think it's even more important to get. And my husband has been really good about taking on a big share of taking care of the kids. I'm not going to say he doesn't much in the house, but you know, taking care of the kids. At least if I'm traveling, he has no problem taking them to school. I know everything's going to be fine. They'll be late every day, but it's okay. They still get there. But I think you have to have that. We were talking about a book. Maybe you can mention that book, like 50-50.
Yeah, there's a book called Getting to 50-50, and the authors spoke at a Past Girls in Tech event, and these women are amazing, and venture capitalists, CEOs, entrepreneurs, and they said they were so passionate about really figuring out this work-life balance that they created this book so that they can teach their husbands how to take on some of the responsibility and teach the women, the wives, to actually let go, just let go of some of the responsibility and build that trust with their partner.
But it's actually easier for us because there's perfect visibility as to why we're busy. We don't have to explain
Yep.
to our husbands why we can't do something. They're already telling you, I'm actually gonna go pick up the kids because I know you have that meeting later today. It's actually much easier.
Yeah, I actually feel that my husband takes much more a 50-50 role.
Yes.
He probably changes 99% of the diapers. Yeah, so I can only do this because he's actually involved 50-50.
Great. These are great success stories. Well, we went over by 5 minutes, but I think these ladies will be here after the panel to answer a few questions. Thank you again for participating. I love your stories, and you guys serve as wonderful role models for all future female entrepreneurs. Thank you.